G'day there, ladies and gents of the internet. I am the Braveheart Aussie and welcome to a journey in world building. We are back for a unscripted episode here as we use our roll tables to create a randomly generated setting within the Dark Diaspora universe. I did this a few months ago using the roll tables that we've established as one of our world building tools here as part of the project, and I have to say I absolutely loved the original setting, that first random setting we created, that sort of Hamlet size scavenger moon with some pirates and bounty hunters, and yeah, lots of fun. Really enjoyed that setting. But we're going to jump into something again using the roll tables and do another randomly generated setting. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this process, basically as part of the world building project for the Dark Diaspora universe, we have created a series of roll tables which we've used in the past a couple of times to help generate different settings within the Dark Diaspora and provide a little bit of randomness. Now, this is premised on like a tabletop role-playing game mechanic, and basically we can use this almost at the DM or GM side of the process to be able to generate a random location of which, if this was a TTRPG format, we could potentially interface with and use to generate a setting for the players to play in. So yeah, we're going to use this to start off with. We're going to go through and establish the location, the settlement type and the resources that are available, the governance type, any factions that are available, and in particular obviously the local terrors and their significance, that being an important part of the Dark Diaspora universe, grim dark elements. One of the things that we have been doing more of now since the last time we did this is that we've now added more threats, and we've just had our most recent threat video. Codename Abyssalum is the threat. It's a parallel eldritch horror-based parallel universe, parallel dimension that is making incursions randomly or seemingly randomly across the Dark Diaspora. So we're going to be able to maybe tie in some of those additional threats in above and beyond that of the local terrors associated with their setting. But yeah, the first idea is to look at the location table, and we're going to roll a d4. We're going to roll some dice using some electronic dice roller across the screen here, and then use that to drive the outcomes of our story. So, first one, d4 basically establishes which quadrant within the Dark Diaspora this is set in. So let's roll a d4. And it's going to be in the fourth quadrant, which is based on the west, I think it is. Yeah, the northwest is so this is everywhere. So far we've looked at Koton, that's in that location. Falls Edge is on the very edge of that location. There's a few different Cancri, which has popped up once before in an early concept video. The Galador Hegemony is another location. Agolia, I think, may have popped up. There's a few places that we've looked at as part of this, which I think, but really interesting quadrant, not somewhere that we've gone to in a huge amount of detail so far, compared to, say, the Tyson Sector Compact, or even elements of, say, the Fringe World Alliance in the northeast and southwest, respectively. So there you go. First location element is going to be in the northwest. And the next tables are going to be around the civilization and resource roll tables, and this is basically going to set the setting at a localized level, the types of resource or technology sophistication of the area, how advanced or lack thereof is it, and then of course the size. Is it going to be small? Is it going to be large? We're going to roll 3d6 to cover each of those three tables, and we're going to read them left to right on the screen to go from setting all the way through to size. So let's click that and see how we go. There we go, perfect. So we have a 6, a 2, and a 2. And based on the roll tables, that means we're dealing with a planet, which is fantastic. Always great to add a new planet to our system. We're going to be dealing with a mining planet, and we're going to be dealing with a town level of civilization. So we're going to be not dissimilar to what we saw with Cancri, I think, early on, where we had a mining-based planetary system at a very small level. That was probably more Hamlet size. This we might go for a little bit different. If we're in the northwest, then I can see us maybe maybe looking at this as being a thrall world or a hegemony world that we can sort of build into some of that Galador hegemony, lore that we want to start to really focus on over the next weeks and months. So yeah, very excited by that. So we have a planetary system with a mining level of resource, civil tech and technology sophistication, and a town level of population. So not a lot of people. Town's about 10,000 people. The way I split it up is Hamlet's about 1,000, towns about 10,000, cities 50, regions is 250, planetary is 1 million, system could be up to potentially 5 million people. That's the sort of split we see. So there you go, 622, fantastic. That's our civilization and our resource roll tables done. And our next roll table is our governance roll table. This is basically about how the type of governance in place, how oppressive it is, and if there's a specific event or hook that is linked to that particular governance model that we can then use as part of our storytelling here for our world building in this particular setting. So is there some particular type of activity or some particular type of event that's taking place? It might be something that's taking place at the point in time that forms the basis of the story, or it could be a regular, frequent occurrence. So everything from like a party celebration, there's some sort of brawl or fight, there's some sort of ceremony, there's a justice-related event, political event, or even an invasion or a military event that we can account for. So we're going to start by rolling a d8. 1 to 4 is just a normal executive, and from 5 above, we start getting into alternative types of governance models. So let's roll that first. And we have rolled a 7, so we have a royalty. That is very interesting. So I'm starting to get an idea of potentially having almost like a... Since the Galador hegemony has very strong, and Galador particularly has very strong Getty Prime vibes in its original sort of concepts, I could see this being sort of like almost like a princedom or a fiefdom that has been allocated to a member of the royal family, whether that be a core central member or maybe a peripheral member. But that is very interesting, and I think leans really well into the types of a different type of model of governance that we haven't really got into before, except for maybe in Samiyaji, where we definitely have a kingdom model there. But that's really the main things that we've seen to date, which is really, really interesting. The next thing we're going to do is roll on the oppression table, and I'm going to change the dice to a d10. And now anything 1 to 4, supportive, it's working okay. 5 to 7, it's somewhat ambivalent. The governance is somewhat ambivalent to the needs of the people. 8 to 9, it's overtly oppressive, and then in number 10, we have an enslavement model, and if we're looking at an 8 or above, if we roll that, then we could potentially add in a revolt element as well. So let's roll this dice and see what we get. And we get a 2, so it's a somewhat supportive model. So I can see this as being like a royal fiefdom mining project. Maybe it's a they've reached out and they've started to establish a world as like a personal fiefdom world of the royal leaders of the hegemony or a member of their family, in order to try and not just secure their own to secure resources, and that they're running this as relatively above the board type model. I just want to roll that again and see if I get something different, because maybe from a storytelling perspective, ambivalent. Yeah, maybe we go with the ambivalent. You can see there I've rolled twice, and this is where the roll tables are really designed to help guide the storytelling rather than dictate the storytelling. So I think maybe an ambivalent level of focus would be more appropriate, of oppression would be more appropriate than, say, a supportive, since it's sort of this royal fiefdom military sort of factor. So anyway, let's run with that and let's see what that looks like. So anyway, we didn't roll an 8 or above, so we don't need to roll in the revolt chance table. So the next one we're going to be looking at is going to be in the events table. And again, this is one of those little story hooks that we might want to include in here. So let's change that to a d6. Let's roll again, and we have a brawl or a fight that is broken out. That's interesting. Maybe there is somebody already on the planet that they're fighting against. maybe it's that type of fight that's broken out against a existing residents, maybe that they didn't know were there, and that's maybe a common occurrence or a theme we want to explore as part of this setting. Is, there's lots of locations around the galaxy that are settled but are not really known, almost like a dark forest element. If you don't want to tell people that you're available, that you're where you are, because you can potentially get destroyed, or your settlement raped and pillaged by unforeseen forces or dangerous forces, particularly those that are more developed than you. So maybe they've landed thinking that it's an unclaimed, unsettled planet, but in fact there is some people already living there, and now they're fighting back against this incursion on their otherwise secretive location. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the governance roll tables completed, and I think that's turning out really, really well. And the following roll table is that of the factions. Now, last time we ended up rolling 3 times on the roll table, so 3d6 3 times. Each of the factions then had their own set of attributes, which we were then able to put into the story. We ended up actually using one of the elements of the story from the previous roll tables to supplant one of these, but we're going to see how these roll. Again, these are story aids to see what we can come up with. So let's roll the first first d6. Again, we'll read left to right on the screen. Okay, so we have a policing and security group that is neutral, and that is focused on trade, and that makes sense. Maybe this is like the royal security force that has been sent to the planet to make sure that the planet, it's not seeking to necessarily impose or be hostile to the workers that have been sent there, but its only real objective is to make sure that the resources flow. So we're starting to talk about the spice flowing. You can start to see almost like a Dune theme to some of these storytelling today, which is very exciting. So I think a police security force that is neutral and is focused just on trade. They're there to make sure that the resources flow to the benefit of the royal fiefdom that they're serving as part of the Galador hegemony. So that's, I think, a really cool faction to add in there. Let's roll for faction number 2. Okay, I think we're going to say we have a religious group, yes, that is also neutral, and that their objective is some sort of enforcement. So maybe what we have here is a very secluded, isolated religious group. Maybe they have located themselves on the planet and haven't communicated themselves out to the wider galaxy for fear of the Tarvan Covenant, or potentially the different religions associated with the God Emperor of the hegemony being coming down and crushing them. And so they've been operating secretly and have been enforcing a very strict code of secrecy and isolation, and therefore are in the process of have been discovered, and therefore that is what's causing the conflicts between the sort of police security force of the hegemony and the religious group that's associated with that was potentially on planet. So there you go, second faction done. Now let's see if we do a third faction. As I said last time, we only did 2. Let's roll a third time and see if we get something inspirational. Community group, they are ingratiating, and they are also enforcement. I don't know if there's a lot in this, except for maybe the workers and their families that have been sent to the planet, and that they are, their enforcement one. Let's roll this again. Ignore the first 2 numbers, and let's have a look and see if we can get a different 6. So trade again, that's a little bit boring. Let's see what the last number is. 4, enforcement again. Yeah, there's not really there. I think, yeah, it's a 4 again. There's nothing really that's popping up there as being what their objectives would be. I think they're being sent there, like if we use the trade model again, they're being sent there to work, basically, to establish a community as a mining colony, but they've basically been sent there to work. So I think let's add them in as a faction, as like the workers of the community and their families, but that, you know, they're sort of caught in the middle potentially between these and, you know, these religious peoples who they started off potentially being ingratiating before the fact that they were being, the religious group was being exposed, turned them violent, and the security forces stepped in to make sure that the trade in the mining resources from the planet continue to flow. So yeah, there we go. We have 3 factions that we have added to our storyline. Again, you can see how we've cherry-picked certain elements of this as we've got along as to what is needed versus what is just what is like we'll take as the results, and what is more of a guide, or even in some cases we just ignore it completely. And finally, we have the local terrors of the world, of the planet here that we're going to be talking about, and we're going to start this with a D4 to find out what type of terror we have here. And we have a 2, so it's a social terror. So I think we're starting to talk more of like a terrorism, like a jihad-style terrorism from the local religious groups and the conflict that's occurring. So I can totally see that being a terror that's being borne out by this particular environment that's sort of been identified, this sort of conflict between the factions. And often with these types of things, it doesn't have to be a like some sort of mystical or biological or environmental type issue, like for example, like the threat we had recently of the interdimensional eldritch horrors. It doesn't have to be that. It can be more of a conflict between different parties that exist on a planet, and these sort of we've already sort of created maybe the threats and of the violence that's taking place by the religious group on the planet, and their enforcement of their secrecy has resulted in sort of terrorist style actions. We had a little bit of a play around with terrorism as a theme or a response to some of the terrors of the most recent setting that we looked at in the story, which is I think cool. But I think maybe we'll have a look at some different ideas of that. Maybe it's less terrorism in the form of like explosions, but more about like maybe some other type of like triggering like psychological warfare type of social impacts. I don't know. We'll have a play around with that and see what we sort of can come up with. So anyway, that is the type of threat, and now we're going to roll on the severity and the response to that threat, again using these as guides. So going from left to right, we have this is somewhat frustrating. So it's basically impeding people's abilities to do the job. Maybe there's a breakdown in the trade and breakdown in activities, but that it's the people are basically on edge. They're terrified of these threats. And I'm starting to think that maybe we have some sort of technology that is causing people to turn, like is basically like, causing people to almost have like either become violent and maybe the religious group has access to a technology they can use to like brainwash people and turn them into sort of like zealot, but really violent zealotry type of mindset that otherwise wouldn't be like that, and that they can use them as sort of like sleeper bombs to trigger them in the community and then cause maximum damage, that the policing force or security force have to step in, and that obviously can cause some pretty serious devastation to that, and that everybody's really on edge and terrified by this potential a threat that's occurring. And I think that is it. I think that is all of the elements that we looked at. So we have a planet. Let's go back through and just do a recap. We have a planet that's located in the galactic northwest, so in the realm of the Galador hegemony. And I think we will have it as a hegemony world. It is a planet that has a mining level of economic technology and sophistication, and it's a town size, so it's not super big. Maybe a relatively recent sort of establishment It's a royalty-based model, so I'm thinking maybe like a royal chartered company, or even like a personal fief of a party that they've, like, this person's been this royal member has been gifted this world as part of their charter, and been given a royal charter to this world, and they're exploiting the resources for their own benefit, and so therefore they're somewhat ambivalent to the local population, being that of the workers and their families that have been moved to the planet to do this work. Maybe we also have some slaves. The Galador hegemony has a very strong slave element to their world. Again, that Getty Prime type theme that we're sort of taking inspiration of for Galador. So maybe some of the ambivalence there is around slaves. I don't know. Maybe we tie a little bit of the slavery into that, and that there is some sort of fight that is occurring, a brawl or a fight. Maybe one of the religious factions has triggered something that has caused somebody to become incredibly violent, as sort of like a sleeper cell, and that's what they're sort of breaking up all of a sudden, is this sort of violent action that's taking place in the community. We rolled 3 different factions for the factions table. We have a policing and security group that is somewhat neutral, is really just focused on keeping the peace to keep the resources flowing for the royal overlord and or benefactor of the planet. We also have a religious group that is somewhat neutral, in this case I'm interpreting neutral as being they're hiding themselves, somewhat isolated, and that they're very much focused on enforcing their own isolation, and they're doing so by almost creating a terror-based environment in the society, because anybody at any point in time could go nuts, almost like the malady and what that inflicts upon people. And maybe they've discovered a way in which, as part using technology, that they can trigger malady-like reactions amongst people and use that almost as a weapon against the third faction, which is the community of the workers and their families, who are sort of caught in the middle between the police and security force and that of this isolated religious group. And then finally we have the terrors themselves. So we have the terror being a social terror, though I think we'll add a little bit of the psychological element to that as well, which I think is very interesting. It's going to be frustrating, and I think that in the sense that it's impeding and frustrating the ability of people to live their daily lives. Maybe there's onerous security factors in place to prevent people from, taking up the doing their jobs, and maybe it's impeding their liberties, which the security forces aren't really caring much about, because they're only caring about the trade continuing of the resources. And we'll have to have a think about what those resources are too, so let's have a think about that. There's a real sense of terror that's occurring, and maybe that's the theme of the story, that we're actually seeing it from the perspective of somebody who is a victim of, or is witnessing one of these people being triggered as this sort of violent incursion into their daily lives. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we're going to leave the setting building part of this episode here today. Hopefully you've enjoyed the use of the roll tables once again to explore the different elements of a randomly generated setting within the Dark Diaspora universe world building project. I will say goodbye now. We'll ask you for a like. I'll ask you for a comment in the section below. Also, any suggestions of ideas that you might have as to what we could potentially do in the future of other settings or other locations. We're going to be jumping into another setting in very shortly, but before we finish off, and before I let you go, I am going to do a quick 3 to 5 minute little hook video, that little episode that sort of takes what we've done today and turn it into a little bit of a story narrative. So, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and may the journey continue. The tearing screech of the las rifle blasts pierced the early morning peace of the mining encampment come town of Oloric City on the planet of Rivarth. Jasmine sat up with a start, terror filling her as she immediately glanced to find her bed empty of her husband Drew. "No, no, 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 no," she exclaimed to herself under her breath, panic welling up within her as she leapt from her bed and out the front door. Her footfalls landed on a damp cold of the early morning frost that sat heavy on the porch of her prefabricated modular housing unit. Her exposed skin from her sleepwear immediately responding to the chill of the air and to the dread-filled adrenaline that flooded her veins. She peered anxiously in the direction of the town square from whence the blasts had echoed and saw a clutch of people in some form of scuffle. "Please no," she exclaimed again in a desperate hope that her greatest fears were being realised as she made a mad dash through the muddy streets towards the square. As she sprinted in approach, she saw several of the local security force detachment that policed the planet on behalf of its lord, Prince Ulrich of Galador. She personally hadn't had any real problems with the security forces to date, with the occasional small bribe or unwanted sexual pass, nothing out of the ordinary. Drew, however, had always bristled at it when one of the security guards had come onto her in front of him, but he knew better than to do anything about it. Yet as she approached, she looked past the security guards to see a familiar form, her husband Drew. He was still dressed in his sleepwear from the evening before, yet his once cleaned and put together appearance had been replaced by a dishevelled, bloodied and angry visage that caught Jasmine by surprise. She had noticed that Drew had become more distant in the last few days, at least more than usual, and she had written it off as the stresses of his mining job. The pressures of filling the quotas of the Prince's Royal Chartered Mining Company were already significant despite the relative immaturity of the colony, and Drew had the added challenge of haranguing a gang of slaves being used to make safe the underground mine shafts. He had never been a violent man, assertive and dominant definitely, but he was always kind to those who deserved it and were worthy of his love and affection. She counted herself blessed to be one of those, and that they had recently started considering having a family thanks in part to the incentives being offered to married couples to move to Rivarth. But the man before her wore a mask of pure rage and anger that she had never seen before. It was then that she saw a second form, another man whose body was slumped on the ground, his arm seemingly broken and his neck twisted in a clearly unnatural position. Jasmine screamed, her mind breaking under the force of the confusion, the terror, and the fear. Her scream drew the attention of her husband, but instead of his loving gaze, his eyes bore straight into her soul with a vicious anger and aggression. "He's like the others," one of the guards yelled to his compatriots. "Quick, let's put him down." Before Jasmine could react to plead for her husband's life, another round of las rifle blasts tore through the air in front of her, causing her to cover her eyes and move back in response to its force and violence. She only caught a moment's glimpse of the energized lasers tearing into her husband's flesh, his crimson blood splattering onto the clothes as the sizzling heats of the blast seared at his blackened skin. Jasmine screamed again as Drew's lifeless body fell to the muddy ground of the town square, and she raced to him, picking up his head and cradling it instinctively. Tears filled her eyes as a wave of emotion rolled over her, the shock, the loss, and the fear made manifest. She kissed at his lifeless face, hoping her love would somehow save him from a death most absolute, for she knew not what else to do. As she cradled him, she noticed something in Drew's left pocket, and reached in to retrieve a small device, a circular transmitter or receiver of some sort, no more than the size of a silver $1. She held it in her hand for a moment and flipped it over to find it emblazoned with the symbol of a tide rope, a crest that her and the other members of Ulrich City had come to know well and to dread. It was the symbol of the Penitent Knot, an isolationist extremist religious group that had made Rivarth their secret home well before the planet was claimed as a fief by the prince. She turned and looked up at the guards gathered around her, holding up the transmitter like an offering, her uncontrolled grief transforming and hardening in a moment into an uncontrolled blind rage. "It was the Knot," she seethed. "We need to kill them. We need to kill them all."